He boarded the plane like any other passenger, calm, composed, and dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that whispered success. To the crew, he was just another black man in first class, sitting quietly in seat 1A with a leather briefcase and a polite nod. What they didn't realize was that behind the reserved demeanor was Jamal Carter, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech empires in America, a man whose decisions shaped industries and whose net worth could buy the very airline he was flying on. But none of that mattered when the flight attendant sneered and told him there were no meals left, even though he was the first to board. None of it mattered when she served every other passenger with a smile and offered second desserts to men who laughed behind his back. She didn't know who he was, and worse, she didn't care. What started as a simple flight became something far more dangerous, a lesson in power, prejudice, and poetic justice. Because when the plane landed, she and the entire crew learned the hard way that the man they disrespected didn't need to shout to be heard. He only had to speak once. Jamal Carter, a sharp, dressed man in his early 40s, stepped onto Flight 746 with the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads without trying. At 6'2", he carried himself with effortless authority. His charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, and his black leather briefcase bore the faded initials JC, a subtle signature of a man who didn't need to flash his wealth to prove it. His stride was unhurried, deliberate, not because he was arrogant, but because when you built a tech empire from scratch, you learned to move through the world on your own terms. He glanced around the first-class cabin, then slipped into seat 1A window side with ample legroom and a view that he rarely used. The sky never impressed him anymore, but this flight wasn't about views. It was about getting home in time for his daughter's piano recital. He'd made a promise, and Jamal Carter didn't break promises, not to investors, not to partners, and never to family. A flight attendant walked past. She was tall, with bleached, blonde hair pinned tightly into a bun. Her name tag read Denise. Jamal offered a polite nod, but Denise only gave him a glance, one of those quick, clipped looks that never reach the eyes, and moved on. Moments later, she beamed at the middle-aged white man sitting directly behind Jamal. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Chambers. Can I get you settled in?" she asked, almost singing. Jamal didn't flinch. This wasn't the first time, and sadly, he doubted it would be the last. He sat back, pulled out his tablet, and tapped open a presentation draft. He was scheduled to speak at a university tech summit later that week, and his keynote on ethical AI needed fine-tuning. But it was hard to focus when you could feel the weight of subtle disrespect pressing down like cabin pressure. As the plane filled, more businessmen filtered into first class. Jamal didn't recognize them, but they all seemed to recognize each other, shaking hands, clapping backs, laughing too loud about market crashes and golf handicaps. Surprised to see one of them up here, one of them muttered not quietly enough. Jamal heard it. He always heard it. But he let it slide like oil off glass. 30 minutes into the flight, the plane leveled out, and Denise began taking dinner orders, starting from the back of first class and working her way forward. Jamal watched her as she knelt slightly beside each seat, smiling, making conversation. She recited the menu choices with practiced elegance: filet mignon with herb butter, or grilled lemon chicken with wild rice. 2 options, simple. When she finally reached seat 1A, she didn't kneel, didn't smile, didn't say hello. She simply stopped in the aisle, notepad in hand. "Sorry," she said flatly, "we're out of the filet mignon, chicken only." Jamal looked up from his tablet, eyebrows raised. "That's strange. I was the first one seated. You didn't even ask my preference." Denise shrugged, as if she didn't have the time or energy to explain herself. "We only have limited stock. The others already chose." He glanced behind him. The others hadn't even been asked yet. Greg Chambers, who Denise had greeted like royalty, was still flipping through a menu, a lie, a petty, unnecessary lie. Jamal stared at her for a moment, long enough for Denise to shift slightly under his gaze. Then he smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Chicken's fine," he said softly, She scribbled something onto her pad and moved on without another word. He leaned back in his seat, closed the tablet, and stared at the back of the headrest in front of him. It wasn't the chicken that bothered him. It wasn't even her tone. It was the lie. The way she had decided without knowing his name, his story, or his power, that he didn't deserve the same courtesy as the others. She had judged him in a blink, and now she wouldn't give him a second thought. That was her mistake. Because while Denise was focused on menus and seat numbers, Jamal Carter was already thinking a few thousand feet higher, strategizing, calculating, and preparing for a very different kind of landing. The meal didn't matter, but what happened next would change everything. Dinner service had begun, and Jamal sat silently, watching the scene unfold around him like a slow-moving play, one he had seen far too many times. Denise was now all smiles as she leaned toward Greg Chambers, the man in seat 1B, a well-known hedge fund manager who had loudly scoffed earlier. Tech guys just get lucky. Real money still lives on Wall Street. Jamal had ignored the jab, but now, with Denise doting on Greg like an old friend, pouring him a second glass of wine and offering him a wink, the contrast was too glaring to ignore. "Can I tempt you with another dessert?" she asked Greg in a flirtatious tone. Greg chuckled. "Didn't you say you were out? For you I found one," she replied with a playful tap on his shoulder. Jamal's eyes narrowed. He hadn't imagined it. Just 30 minutes ago she told him there were no desserts left. No filet mignon either. All gone, yet somehow Greg, seated beside him, was now enjoying both. Meanwhile, another attendant, Bryce, approached Jamal's row. He barely made eye contact as he handed Jamal a bottled water without a word, without a smile. Then he turned and walked away without even checking if Jamal wanted anything else. Jamal let the silence hang. This wasn't about service anymore. It was about principle. He picked up his tablet again, but this time not to review any keynote slides. He tapped a hidden icon in the top corner of the screen and opened an app labeled Sky Report, an internal tool still under development at Carter Tech. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary dashboard app. But beneath the surface, it was a game changer. An AI-powered monitoring platform designed to collect and analyze behavioral data from employees in real time. Sky Report wasn't publicly available yet. Only 2 companies were participating in a private beta. One of them happened to be the airline operating Flight 746. Jamal hadn't planned it this way, but when the universe hands you coincidence, you pay attention. He logged into the system with a fingerprint scan and scanned the flight number, 746 lax to SFO. Within seconds, the app began pulling up a live feed from onboard security cameras discreetly placed in the cabin, part of the airline's internal performance review program. Sky Reports I was running facial recognition, tone analysis, and speech sentiment scoring in real time. Jamal's screen populated with profiles: Denise Reynolds, lead flight attendant; Bryce Mitchell, secondary attendant. He clicked on Denise's name first. A timeline of her interactions lit up with AI-flagged moments highlighted in red. One red marker stood out. Timestamp 1847. He tapped the audio playback. Denise's voice came through in a hushed whisper. "I don't get why they let these people into first class now. Let's just keep it civil and make it quick. These people." Jamal paused the playback. The phrase echoed in his mind like a sudden gust of cold wind. The tone, the context, there was no mistaking it. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was intentional bias, spoken freely, like she assumed no one was listening. But someone was, and that someone just happened to be her boss's boss's boss. He tapped Save Clip and added it to a report file. Then he switched over to the visual logs. The app had flagged Denise giving Greg extra items, things she explicitly claimed were unavailable. The AI categorized it under inconsistency of service, a polite label for what Jamal knew was a more toxic reality. Discrimination wrapped in a smile. He watched the footage for a moment longer, Denise laughing, Greg leaning in closer, Bryce high-fiving another crew member in the galley like they were sharing some inside joke. Jamal's jaw tightened. His hands, however, remained steady. Years in boardrooms, in negotiations with billionaires and senators alike, had trained him to remain calm in the face of even the most blatant disrespect. But this was personal, not because they didn't know who he was, but because they didn't care who he was. They had made their judgments the moment he boarded, before he spoke, before he smiled, before he even sat down. He gently set the tablet on his tray table, fingers resting on the edges of the screen. For a brief second his hand trembled, not with rage but with something sharper. Resolve, he leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed, letting the gentle hum of the engines drown out the rising heat in his chest. "They don't know," he whispered under his breath, almost amused. "They don't know who they're dealing with, and soon they would." An hour before landing, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The cabin lights flickered slightly as the aircraft dipped and steadied, the usual hum of conversation turning into hushed murmurs. Passengers gripped their armrests. The first-class cabin suddenly felt a little smaller. Jamal remained calm. He'd flown hundreds of times, seen far worse. He calmly pressed the call button above his head. A soft chime echoed. A few seconds passed. Then Denise appeared, visibly tense. "I'd like another bottle of water, please," he said, his voice measured, respectful. She folded her arms. "We're in turbulence. You need to stay seated. I am seated. Well, don't press the call button during turbulence unless it's an emergency." She snapped, glaring at him like he'd just asked to land the plane himself. "If it continues, I'll notify the captain." Before Jamal could respond, Greg, now feeling brave and buoyed by 2 glasses of red wine and Denise's attention, twisted in his seat and looked over his shoulder. "Don't cause trouble, big man," Greg chuckled. "It's just a water, chill out." A few passengers nearby turned their heads. One woman frowned, another man pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll but clearly watching. Jamal didn't respond. He didn't need to. He simply reached for his tablet again, this time moving slower, more intentionally. The power of silence, he'd learned, was often louder than the sharpest rebuke. He opened another app, one not even available on standard company devices. This one was Skynet CRM Access, an administrative tool that gave high-level executives real-time access to employment data, staffing schedules, and internal incident reports across Carter Tech's expanding portfolio of subsidiaries. He typed in the flight number, 746. The dashboard loaded instantly. In seconds, Jamal saw what he already suspected. The cabin crew wasn't employed directly by the airline. They were part of a contracted staffing agency that managed onboard personnel for mid-range flights, a cost-cutting strategy that had been debated in the boardroom just weeks ago. The name of that staffing agency, Airverse Solutions, and just 2 weeks earlier, Carter Tech had quietly acquired a controlling stake in Airverse through a merger that had barely made the business section headlines. The transaction was strategic, part of Jamal's initiative to expand Carter Tech's reach into transportation infrastructure. It hadn't gone public yet, only seen. Your level directors and C-suite members even knew. Which meant as of 14 days ago, Jamal Carter was the legal and financial superior to every flight attendant working Flight 746, including Denise, including Bryce, including the third crew member who'd barely looked Jamal's way the entire trip. He looked up again, this time with new eyes. The same faces, the same biases, but now it felt like he was watching them through glass, from above, detached like a ghost floating silently in the cabin. Unseen, unacknowledged, but ever present, they had no idea. Denise stood a few feet away, chatting once again with Greg. She had dropped the professional mask entirely now, laughing too loudly at one of his tired jokes. Her posture relaxed, her voice casual. Bryce passed by again with a tray of coffee. He gave Jamal the briefest glance, still not offering a word. Jamal almost smiled. The irony was too rich. These attendants had spent the entire flight deciding who was worthy of good service based on appearances. Based on their assumptions, they thought Jamal was just another first-class anomaly. Maybe an athlete, maybe a lottery winner, someone who didn't belong, but had slipped through somehow. They had no idea the man in seat 1A signed the checks that funded their uniforms, their training, their entire operation. Jamal tapped the screen again and accessed the personnel review module, then opened the real-time evaluation input for Flight 746. There it was, an option to file a priority-level executive report. He didn't submit it, not yet. Timing was everything. He believed in justice, but he also believed in precision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final approach into San Francisco. Please return your seatbacks to the upright position and fasten your seatbelts." Jamal did as instructed. Denise walked through the aisle one final time, checking buckles and tray tables. When she passed his row, she still didn't look at him. Still didn't speak, but Jamal saw it now. Not just the indifference, but the carelessness, the professional rot that formed when people stopped believing they could be held accountable. And that, he thought, was the real problem, because accountability was coming. They just hadn't recognized its face yet. The wheels of Flight 746 kissed the tarmac at San Francisco International Airport with a soft thud. A light round of applause broke out in the rear of the cabin. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed off, and the aisle filled with the usual rustle of motion carry, ons being yanked down, jackets slipping over shoulders, polite apologies muttered as passengers jostled for space. Jamal Carter remained seated in 1A, calm, composed, letting the crowd surge forward. Denise stepped up to the intercom for one final announcement. Her voice as polished and flat as ever. "Thank you for flying with us today. We hope to see you again soon." She didn't glance his way, not a nod. Not a goodbye, but that was fine. Jamal rose, picked up his leather duffel, and made his way down the jet bridge like any other passenger. Yet, the moment he stepped into the terminal corridor, the scene changed instantly. Standing by the wall, waiting with a tablet in one hand and a phone in the other, was Robert Hale, Vice President of Operations at Carter Tech. Tall, clean, cut, and slightly out of breath, he looked like a man who'd dropped everything to be here. "Mr. Carter," Robert greeted with a nod, holding out the phone. "We've got your executive team on video call. Legal, HR, and comms are all online." Jamal took the phone without breaking stride. "Thank you, Robert. Let's walk." They stepped a few feet back onto the jet bridge, far enough from the stream of disembarking passengers to speak in private. On the screen, three familiar faces appeared: Sasha from Legal, Michael from HR, and Rita from Communications, all waiting in quiet anticipation. Jamal lifted the phone slightly and spoke clearly. "Hi, everyone," he said, his tone measured and sharp. "Let's begin the termination protocols for the following crew members: Denise Reynolds, Bryce Mitchell, and any other contracted personnel assigned to Flight 746 today who were involved in customer-facing roles, effective immediately." No hesitation, no need for discussion. Behind him, a voice cracked through the quiet. You can't do that." Jamal turned. It was Denise. She had exited the aircraft and overheard everything. Her face was flushed with disbelief, her eyes wide with panic. "You're just a passenger," she sputtered. "You don't have that authority." Passengers walking past slowed slightly, pretending not to watch but clearly intrigued. Even Greg, dragging his Louis Vuitton carry-on, looked stunned as he turned to see what the fuss was about. Jamal tucked the phone under his arm and looked Denise directly in the eye. "No," he said simply. "I'm the CEO of Carter Tech, the parent company that now owns Airverse Solutions, which manages the staffing contracts for your airline." Denise's mouth fell open, her words caught in her throat. "And unlike you," Jamal continued, "I don't make decisions based on skin color, assumptions, or condescension. I make them based on performance, values, and respect." Robert stepped closer, phone back in hand. "The documentation is being processed now. You'll be formally notified by your agency within the hour." Denise looked around as if trying to find a sympathetic face among the crowd, but none met her gaze. Greg quietly backed away. "Wait, this is insane." She tried again, voice cracking. It was just a misunderstanding. A rough day. Jamal shook his head gently. No, it was a pattern, and unfortunately for you, that pattern played out under a pilot test of our AI compliance monitoring. You weren't just rude, you were recorded being discriminatory. She blinked, recorded. He nodded, eyes and ears in the sky. Denise, that's what our system does. You judged me as someone beneath you, but you never stopped to ask who I was. Silence. The air between them grew heavier by the second. Oh, he added, turning slightly as he prepared to leave. And by the way, enjoy the chicken. The line landed like a punch, cutting through the tension with cold finality. Robert tried to hide a smirk. Behind them, a younger flight attendant stepped back onto the jet bridge to retrieve something, heard just the end of the exchange, and quickly turned away. Jamal handed Robert the phone and walked toward the baggage claim area. His shoulders relaxed, the weight of the flight shed like an old coat. He had said all he needed to say, and now it was time to let the fallout do the rest. By the time Jamal's town car reached the Carter Tech headquarters downtown, the world already knew. A video, shaky but clear, had been uploaded by a passenger in row 3B. It began with Denise brushing off Jamal's request for water during the turbulence, then cut to the moment she snapped at him near the gate, followed by the now viral confrontation where Jamal calmly explained who he really was. The clip was just over 2 minutes long, but it was explosive. By noon, hashtags like #CEOJustice, #Flight746Truth, and #WingsNeedDignity were trending on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. The video had been reshared by influencers, civil rights advocates, and business leaders alike. Screenshots from the video call with Carter Tech's legal team were already being dissected on Reddit. One commenter wrote, "When quiet power speaks, it's deafening." Another simply captioned the clip, "This is what accountability looks like." The airline's PR team scrambled to respond. By early afternoon, a statement appeared on their website and social channels. "We are deeply concerned by the behavior displayed on Flight 746. This incident does not reflect the values of our airline. We have initiated an internal review and will be reevaluating our subcontractor relationships and bias training protocols." The words were neat, polished, predictable. Jamal barely glanced at them. He didn't want an apology. He wanted action, and he already had a plan. That evening, with his top executives gathered in the 32nd floor conference room overlooking the bay, Jamal unveiled a new internal initiative, Wings of Equity. It wasn't just a feel-good campaign. It was a full-scale accountability program designed to combat systemic bias across commercial aviation. Carter Tech's AI tools would be licensed to airlines across the nation, not just for compliance, but for transformation. Real-time monitoring of service quality, voice tone analysis, passenger treatment metrics, and equity scoring would become the standard, not the exception. The kicker: Jamal pledged to personally fund the first year of audits for all partner airlines that opted in. No strings attached, no marketing fluff, just progress. The next morning, Carter Tech's press release went live, and within an hour it was headline news. Forbes called it a revolutionary merger of tech and justice. CNN Business ran the headline, "Black CEO Turns Discrimination into Disruption." Fast Company said simply, "He's changing how we fly." In a follow-up interview, when asked what motivated the initiative, Jamal looked straight into the camera and said, "We're not just flying, we're flying forward." The quote ricocheted across social media, printed on shirts, plastered in subways, echoed in boardrooms. That afternoon, an unexpected call came in from the CEO of the very airline that had subcontracted Flight 746. He was apologetic, embarrassed, and humbled. He offered to meet Jamal for lunch. Jamal declined the lunch, but offered something better: partnership in Wings of Equity with full transparency. And then life went on, but something had shifted. At a quiet airport lounge in Charlotte 2 weeks later, a young black woman named Aaliyah stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 218. She was a rising executive in a green energy startup, and had only recently started flying premium. The crew welcomed her warmly, and a flight attendant named Julia leaned in and said, "You're our first seat tonight, Ms. Thomas. Would you like the filet mignon or the vegetarian pasta? Aaliyah blinked, surprised by the care. Filet, please, she said. As she sat, she noticed a small sticker near the bulkhead wall. A tiny blue wing with a circuit pattern across it. Beneath it, in crisp white font, were the words, "Wings of Equity powered by Carter Tech." She smiled. She didn't know the whole story. She hadn't seen the video, but she could feel the shift in the air. Somewhere else, Jamal Carter sat in another terminal lounge, sipping his coffee and preparing for his next flight. No fanfare, no cameras, just a man moving through the world he was helping to reshape one boarding pass at a time. The sky had always been limitless. Now, finally, it felt fair too. What happened on Flight 746 wasn't just about a denied meal. It was about dignity, respect, and the quiet battles so many face in places meant to be equal. Jamal Carter didn't raise his voice, didn't create a scene. Instead, he used what he had, intelligence, power, and patience, to expose the truth and make lasting change. It's a reminder that sometimes the strongest response isn't rage but resolve. That respect isn't earned by status, it's owed to everyone, no matter who they are or where they sit on the plane. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about the little moments we often overlook, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Hidden Realities for more powerful. Trudel, I've stories that reveal what really matters. What would you have done if you were in Jamal's seat? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. Until next time, remember, sometimes justice doesn't shout, it just lands.